All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I trust we are having a good time, enjoying the, let's say, information pack that has been coming from my previous speakers. Isreal Ogboi, process engineer with Tel Cables Nigeria. And from Tel Cables Nigeria, for our guests coming outside the country, we would like to tell you Ekabo, Sheda Dalede. And that basically is a Yoruba language saying welcome and hope you had a safe trip and your experience here has been very good. So during my small talk today, I'll be focusing on Africa's subsea infrastructure, existing infrastructure, and how we could leverage this more to create a much more resilient subsea network and improve quality of content, and also create a new sourcing point because if we look at the previous presentations, we see a lot of our demand are towards Europe. So we need to find a way to either get alternate routes to Europe to avoid when there are cable cuts, or to source for content from a different region, or to create a hub where you have a connection towards other continents and then go towards North America or go back to Europe. So while I wait for the presentation to be up, okay, all right, awesome. Okay, so I guess I'll just go and introduce the company I work with. I work with Tel Cables, which is a subsidiary for Angola Cables. So in our bid to empower Africa's data residency and digital growth journey, we manage 2 exchanges, one in Angola and the other in Brazil. We also own 2 data centers, and we employ more partners to leverage our solutions to reach to remote exchanges globally. So right here is Africa's subsea infrastructure. Considering the timeline of 2005 to 2025, and we see this is Africa's digital infrastructure. This is what supports majority of our internet traffic. And what we see as a concern is this is not distributed evenly across different regions of the continent. Some is towards the east segment of Africa, much more resilient than the western segment of Africa because of consistent cuts. And we see there are several countries with a single cable landing station, and majority of them are towards the western half of Africa, which will form the basis of my discussion today, a way we can build a resilient subsea infrastructure to support when there are issues at these regions. So the most connected nation so far is Egypt, with a couple, with almost, I think, 14 or 20 cables landing in those regions. And this is a distribution of cables on the western segment of Africa. So we see there's a lot of connections. Some of these cables are short-length cables. Some of them are continental cables connecting Europe to Africa, maybe stopping at Nigeria, and some go all the way to South Africa. But then there are 2 interesting cables that go from Africa westward, and these cables are AF-CIX, the South Atlantic Cable System, and the SAIL cable system. AF-CIX goes from Angola to Brazil, and SAIL goes from Cameroon to Brazil. But still on this first picture, you see an interesting red dot. That red dot is what happened in March. So previously, when we speak of cable resilience, a lot of the partners say, I'm on 2 cable systems going through the western segment of Africa. I'm quite protected. This is not necessary. And what we typically say is, yes, you are protected, but the odds of something happening, as long as that chance is there, it can happen. And we saw something like that happen in March 2024, where a series of cable systems went down at the same time. And we can see the majority of the countries impacted on the right-hand side, is in Western Africa. So we see nations like Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, where the cuts happened. There was a significant drop in traffic available to those regions. On this slide, we measure what that drop looked like. So we see capacity available at those countries. There's a drastic drop. But we also see there's a commercial impact to this. So on the traffic impact of Ghana, for example, we can compare what it was the previous day and what it was on that day when the cable system cut started happening. we see there's a drastic drop in consumption alongside an increase compared to the previous day, because typically at night, consumption kinds of plateaus, then on the next day spikes again, because that is when activities resume. But on the other side is an economic impact, which I find very interesting. So every transaction delayed has a economic roll-up effect per se, because a good you would have bought a day before is delayed by 2 days, and now your time to maybe turn profit has then shifts back by a couple of weeks or some days, or you get additional costs with demurrage at the port. So all these are impacts that happens when partners like us have not built a very resilient infrastructure, considering what Africa currently has, which we can leverage more to support the end users and make sure we have a resilient digital infrastructure. What 3 cable systems I would just like to highlight are the AF-CIX, Link, and Monet cable system. The AF-CIX cable system connects Africa to South America, and the Link cable system goes from Brazil to Lisbon, and Monet cable goes from Fortaleza to Miami. At these points, there are several data centers where you can pick up this capacity, and there are different technology available on them. There are layer 1 technology like DWDM, SDWOTU4 available for pickup. There are also layer 2 capacities depending on what your demands are and what kind of solution you are looking to leverage. So for me, I would say to speak more on this, we need to show a workable solution and what this impact looks like for us. And we see there are several hyperscalers that leverage this infrastructure to come from America down to Brazil, then leverage AF-CIX cable to Africa, then either go through to Africa when it comes up in Angola, or WAX cable to extend to other nations within the region. So we try to compare what these latency figures look like, because the latency figures are one of the key concerns when we are having these discussions to start with. And we see the average latency, or rather what we typically see between Lagos to London, for example, is around 102 milliseconds. But you compare that to what you have to go to Brazil, where you can build a branch either through Link going back to Europe, creating a ring, a subsea ring to protect your subsea infrastructure, or leveraging Monet to go to Equinix MI3 or MI1, where these capacities are also available for you to pick up and then build a resilient infrastructure. So some concerns we see are some partners saying that exchanges and contents that they gain from going to these regions. In Europe, where we majorly source contents, as displayed earlier, we go there because the contents we get are closer to us, and we have the lowest latency to those contents, and some of those contents we consume. So what we aim to do is also highlight what we can do as getting a new sourcing point, so sourcing from Europe and also sourcing from the US. I don't think there's any need to justify the necessity of sourcing from the US. It's basically the home for data for now. And there are different kind of exchanges there. There are financial exchanges, there are AI exchanges, there are content exchanges, there are gaming exchanges, depending on what your use case is and what you aim to get. And some of these exchanges, there are remote pairing solutions available to them. And these solutions typically ride on either the AF-CIX or SAIL cable, and they leverage either Cerberus, Monet, or other cables in South America to get to US, or you could go to Europe, then go westward to the US. But you still face the same issue, which is the cut that happens in Cote d'Ivoire. So what we suggest is always try to create a ring solution. So in case there's a break here, you are available on the other route. Some of the CDNs that are also available at this place for you to flavor up your IP content or deliver a better content to the local markets are what I've highlighted here. And there are also several others you stand to gain depending on what your primary market is. If your primary market is geared towards gaming, if your primary market is geared towards the financial institution, or if your primary market is geared towards the IT space, there are several kind of content available, there are several kind of exchanges available, and we try to employ others to always leverage these solutions. So one way of of showing that these solutions work is testing it yourself. And there's nothing that beats a testimonial or something that beats a case study. And what we've tried to do, because we have all these capabilities in-house to us and also through partners we work with to get these capabilities into our network, we've done an analysis of our data from customers that are connected to us here and to see where's their destination, where they go to typically across the globe. And we see 37% of that data that exits Nigeria goes to Europe, and 31% goes to South Africa, then 32%, which is an interesting figure, goes to either Miami or Fortaleza through the WAX, AF-CIX, and Monet cable to those regions. So there's something to gain for your end users, there's something to gain for you because you build a much more resilient network. So we employ other partners to leverage this infrastructure between Africa to South America and Africa to the US, Africa to Europe, for you to build a very resilient and very resolute network. So because every single downtime is a bit too much, it's better to have maybe higher latency, but you are still up rather than being totally out. So just reach out to the partners, reach out to the providers for these cables that provide this capacity, and I'm sure they'll be willing to support in different ways with restoration capacity, with sign-off agreement, and also with swap agreements for you to benefit the usefulness of this already existing infrastructure connecting Africa to the globe. Thank you.